The satellite's gone up to the sky. Things like that drive me out of my mind. I watched it for a little while. Love to watch things on TV. Satellite of love. Satellite of love.
If YouTube let that little snippet in, that was from the epic 1992 into 1993, the ZooTV Tour with U2. They were, of course, touring behind Achtung Baby, and eventually they dropped Zooropa as well. So the last legs of that tour encompassed a bit of Zooropa as well. Achtung Baby is today's topic, and I'm going to be calling this episode number 2 of Best in Class, the iconic albums. This is definitely an iconic album for U2. Back to that tour, first of all. We're going to talk about the tour first. One of the more gargantuan tours ever launched. I think this thing had 5 different legs, and they did 157 different shows. They really wanted to kind of blow the doors off of a conventional concert setting. They had a mammoth stage. They had a couple different configurations depending on whether it was an outdoor situation or an indoor arena. They used a number of these German Trabant cars that were painted and then actually used as lighting devices. They kind of took the piss on over media saturation. They were satirizing religious television, which was a thing back in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, and actually even today in America. It was really a multimedia experience. They would take people out of the crowd and hand them a video camera and ask them to film the Edge in action. A tour concept that was a little bit ahead of its time in 1992 and 1993. It was an amazing undertaking and deserves its own kind of attention, maybe its own video someday. I did do some poking around, and there are 2 or 3 full shows that are available, one in Australia and another one in the US, I think. But kind of an interesting time warp to go back and watch those concerts. As far as songs were concerned, they actually let off the first leg of the first few legs of that concert. They were playing 6 or 7 songs from Achtung Baby. No classics or anything were mixed in. They started off strong and then eventually eased their way into some catalog standouts. And they also mixed in a lot of covers, which that clip was Lou Reed classic. Now, as far as bands that opened for U2 during over the course of the 2 years, the Pixies famously, I think they were the opening act for almost the entirety of the first year of those shows. And then they cycled in, the reformed and reunited Velvet Underground. There was the Sugar Cubes, PJ Harvey, and Belly as well. So that's the concert tour, the ZooTV Tour. Let's turn back the clock, though, to before Achtung Baby, the germinations of that great album. And I guess I need to kind of show you guys the album, don't I? I actually have two different copies. This is an original European pressing, still with that fantastic hype sticker, standard black vinyl. I just gave this thing a listen yesterday. Crisp, bright, even where it needs to be as far as stereo imaging and separation of instruments. Dynamic, punchy. It's an amazing listen, an amazing group of songs. I want to give a shout out here locally to Charles at Driver 8 Record Shop. They're in Old Town, Fort Collins. Charles helped me source this original pressing. He recently got in a fantastic collection, which I'm having a hard time avoiding. But that is a fantastic European first press. Last year I picked up the 30th anniversary. This, of course, featured the Adam Clayton censored cover. I won't show you my uncensored cover, but I do have the uncensored European cover. This included a poster and a little bit of talking about those standout songs. You know, this album spawned 5 different singles. Getting a little glare here this morning. But an amazing album. Let's go back and talk about the germination. First of all, we had the Joshua Tree, and then, you know, U2, they were coming across as a little preachy, a little bit of righteousness with that album, and even more so as they moved into that world tour behind the Joshua Tree. Don't get me wrong, I love the Joshua Tree as an album, but the band was getting a little too big, a little oversaturated. There was some kickback among the general public that, you know, U2 was getting to be a little too big for the 10-gallon hat that Bono typically would wear during the Western shows in particular, the Western U.S. shows in particular on the Joshua Tree tour. Anyone who has seen Rattle and Hum and the grand undertaking that the band attempted with kind of encapsulating that concert experience, it's way over the top. Now, Rattle and Hum, the kind of soundtrack to the film, included some new music that they cut with Jimmy Iovine in Los Angeles. One of those songs was God Part 2, and it didn't really fit, the puzzle of the Joshua Tree and the previous couple albums before that. They were kind of cutting new territory with that song, and that song could have easily ended up fitting quite nicely on Achtung Baby. Bono and The Edge have said in interviews that song, God Part 2, is a kind of precursor to a rougher edged, live sounding a sound and just general vibe that the band wanted to move forward with. Now, when I say the band, first of all, during this time period, let's say 1990, before they went into the studios in late 1990, and we'll talk about that, where they went. The Edge was listening to KFM DM and Nine Inch Nails. So he was into industrial, noisier rock and roll with some electronic elements mixed in as well, and was really kind of vibing on that situation. Bono, of course, always writing, always thinking, had come up with some songs. And they decided, with the end of the Iron Curtain, the reunification of Germany, they wanted to go to Berlin, to the famous Hansa Studios, where Bowie and Iggy Pop had recorded all those great albums, and wanted to kind of set up shop there. They arrived there in October of 1990. Hansa Studios at the time was not what it used to be. Things had kind of fallen down. They U2 ended up having to ship in equipment, boards, etc. To do this work. The people tasked with helping U2 along were a familiar trio. They were Daniel Lanois was kind of the lead producer. We had Brian Eno, who kind of considered himself a reality check. His job was to come in once a month, once every 2 months during this recording process, and throw out anything that sounded like old U2. The Edge and Bono were determined to change their sound, and change the kind of trajectory of the band. They wanted to move away from this kind of righteousness and almost a religiosity in the music, and wanted to move to more of a cutting edge live sound. And Daniel Lanois, that was his main task in trying to focus the band towards. Eno was there to kind of make sure that things were hopefully moving forward in an experimental soundscape. And if it was old U2, he didn't like it, he threw it out. And then finally we had Steve Lillywhite also helping out quite a bit. Of course, the old hand on deck for those earlier U2 albums. Great producer in his own right. So they had quite the brain trust going there. And of course, the Edge and Bono with their growing knowledge of the recording process and how things came together. Now, Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen were not 100% on board with having to move directions. Larry Mullen in particular was concerned about any kind of elements of computerized drums and drum machines. Was that going to kind of slice into his ballywick? So he was concerned with that. Now, after arriving in October of 1990 in Berlin, by all accounts, these guys had a bit of a tough time in agreeing a direction and making any progress. There was a situation where they had actually discussed disbanding, calling it a day as a band. They broke for Christmas and came back briefly in January, and then made a decision to kind of pull up out of Berlin back to Dublin. They located a very cool mansion southeast of Dublin called Elsinore, literally on the sea right there, and that's where they recorded the bulk of the rest of the album. The song that kind of turned the tide and brought everyone back together was the huge single One, and they kind of figured out that as a band they were still able to kind of put something together from the very beginning, bring it to its full fruition. U2 are known as being tinkerers in the studio. This album took a year to record between Berlin and Dublin. Then they finally did some mixing at Windmill Studios in Dublin as well. But this is a real statement. It sold a gazillion copies. Like I said, the tour was unreal. A totally different experience for U2. Really groundbreaking as far as that tour was concerned. Side 1, Zoo Station. Even better than The Real Thing. And then One. Now, I'm actually looking at the 30th anniversary where they split this up into 2 LPs. I haven't heard anything about this sound quality on this. I haven't actually opened this yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that copy because I'm so happy with this original pressing. Let's take a look at some other amazing songs. Until the End of the World, definitely more of an experimental, moody dreamscape on that song. Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses? A bit of a leftover track. This could have easily fit in on the Joshua Tree. And then So Cruel is a different styled song as well. Side 2, the incredible song The Fly. This is a song that would usually lead off the ZooTV Tour concerts. Of course, Bono in his black leather with the wraparound shades, kind of nicknamed The Fly. That was a persona that he had, as well as it's escaping me now, but his devil character that he would get into as well later on in the concert. Mysterious Ways, Trying to Throw Your Arms Around the World, another dreamscapey, kind of a mellow song. Ultraviolet, Acrobat, and Love is Blindness. Strong, strong, strong group of songs. Definitely, although there were a couple holdovers from the previous incarnation of U2 as far as sound was concerned, I would say Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses and One. Those could have appeared easily on the Joshua Tree or the Unforgettable Fire. Achtung Baby, released in November 1991. Again, U2 spent almost a year in the recording and mixing of the album. It shows it is a landmark album in the U2 discography. This was their 7th album, and definitely kind of showed a direction to being a little more self-deprecating, not as quite as high on themselves, and being able to pivot and change their sound, taking in kind of the surroundings as far as different soundscapes that were being heard out there with different bands and different movements. They managed to keep themselves very, very relevant with this album and move forward into the 1990s. It would prove to be an interesting decade for U2. As far as the future of the band as we stand right now, there has been a recent article out there saying, Bono is saying he wants to put out an experimental guitar-heavy album. So things have come full circle since 1991. He's back there, probably talking with The Edge and saying that, hey, they really need to kind of switch things up. The last 2 or 3 albums, I think, were kind of snoozers, well-crafted, great albums, but it is time, I think, for U2 to shake things up like they did in 1991 with Achtung Baby. That has been episode 2 that you've just watched, talking about some iconic albums that I love, that I think stand the test of time. They should earn a place in your collection if you don't have them. Hopefully I've helped urge you on to maybe revisit the album and consider finding a copy for your collection. Best in class, the iconic albums, Achtung Baby. I will be back soon with a new video. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great weekend.